So this video is to help you go through the Unit 5 review. And this is what it looks like. You can get it from assignments on Canvas. And basically, by completing this video, I'm going to take you through the entire review. So when we're done, you should have the review done and you can go ahead and submit it. Also keep in mind you'll have the correct answers. And just a little hint, towards the end of the video, I'm going to give you some kind of specific information that will definitely help you on your quiz coming up next time. I'm actually going to go out of order. I'm going to go in the order that we actually did these in Unit 5. So I'm going to go to the last page, number 6. It says graph each of the following using vertex form. One of the first things that we did was graph parabolas. Remember, the y equals x squared is the basic parabola that has a vertex at 0, 0. And the plus 1 is going to move my parabola 1 unit to the left. And the minus 4 moves it down 4. So there's my vertex. And because there's no number in front, or it's an assumed 1, that means we have that idea of slope where you're up 1 over 1, and you can draw the parabola. We took a quiz over this. Everybody did great on it, so I'm going to kind of cruise through this pretty quickly. On the next one, that minus 2 tells me 2 units to the right. The plus 4 tells me 4 units up, so that means my vertex is moved up here. And then that negative 3 is the idea of slope, so down 3 over 1. And that tells me I've got this parabola. Whoops, I missed it, right? It's actually kind of a narrow parabola. Okay? Then on 7 and 8, these are the kinds where you have to complete the square in order to put it in vertex form. So I need to make this look like a quantity squared. Notice it says change each of the following to vertex form. So I know that to fill in the parentheses, it's going to be x minus 1, because remember, I always take half of that number. And the idea is when this is squared out, the last number is going to be a 1, but we don't want it to be a 1. We want it to be a minus 2. So that means I'm going to have to put a minus 3 over here. So that's my vertex form. And then, of course, I can graph that 1 unit to the right, 3 down. That idea of slope is 1. And so there is my parabola. Okay, on the next one, this is the kind, because there's a number in front of the x squared, you've got this middle term, or the middle step, I should say. So my last step is going to be where I have my quantity squared. But in the middle, I have to factor out the negative 3. And remember, we're just taking it out of the x's, so it's going to be a positive x squared. And if I take negative 3 out of 12x, it's going to be a negative 4x. So I'm not taking half of that number yet because I'm not to that step yet. Leave the minus 15. Now, bring the negative 3 straight down. Leave it at negative 3. Now is when I'm ready to complete the square. So I take half of the 4, so x minus 2. And then remember, in order to figure out what goes at the end, you got to think about it this way. 2 squared is 4. But that 4 is being multiplied by the negative 3. So really, I have negative 12. I don't want negative 12. I want negative 15. So I'm going to have to put a minus 3 here, because that's going to bring the 12 down to negative 15. So there's my vertex form. So 2 to the right, 3 down. And then that number out in front is negative 3. So from that point, I'm going to go down 3 and over 1. I know it's going off the graph, but that's all right. We're doing it correctly. So we've already taken a quiz over that. That was like sections, I think that was sections 1 and 2, something like that. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning of this, because this is actually some of the more recent stuff that we've done. And this is what's going to be on your 5.3 and 5.4 quiz next time. So really right now, I'm helping you review for your quiz that's coming up in the next class. So first of all, complete the following and sketch the graph. So remember, standard form is when you have maybe some number in front of x squared, maybe some number in front of x, and then maybe some number at the end. Remember, the a, b, and c are just like numbers. So on this one, the a number, the number that's in front of x squared, is negative 1. The b number, the number that's in front of x, is negative 2. And since there is no number at the end, that's like saying the c is 0. And the reason that's significant, because remember we said the formula for the axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2a. So in this case, it's going to be x equals, if b is negative 2, then negative b is positive 2, and then 2a, 2 times negative 1, would be negative 2. So the axis of symmetry is actually x equals negative 1. And what that means is there's this kind of imaginary vertical line over here at negative 1, right? And we know the vertex is going to be on that line. So I know the vertex is negative 1 comma something, because that comes from the axis of symmetry. And remember we said in order to find out what the y value is, I need to plug that negative 1 into my equation. So everywhere I see an x, I'm going to plug in negative 1. So I'm going to have y equals the negative that's in front of the x squared. Then in place of x, I have negative 1. That x is being squared, minus 2. And then in place of that last x, I have negative 1. So I need to do some math. That's going to be negative, and then the negative 1 squared is positive 1. Negative 2 times negative 1 is going to be a plus 2, and that's going to simplify to be positive 1. So my vertex is negative 1, positive 1. So there's my vertex. Maybe I'll put it in red to kind of match that that's where I did my math. And then remember the y-intercept is always just the c number. And in this case, since there was no c, remember the c is 0, so the y-intercept is 0. That means it's going to hit the y-axis at 0. Now, I could graph my parabola, but consider that idea of symmetry, right? Because I have this point over here, that means I'm going to have a point equidistant on this side. So that means my parabola is going to look something like this, which hopefully that makes sense that it would open down, because remember you have the negative in front of the x squared, right? Doesn't that mean it's opening down? Okay. So let's try another one. So axis of symmetry, remember we said negative b over 2a. So negative b would be negative 4. 2 times a, since a is 1, 2a would just be 2. So my axis of symmetry is negative 2. So this is kind of my imaginary line at negative 2, which means the vertex has an x coordinate of negative 2. And then in order to find the y, I'm going to plug negative 2 up into my equation everywhere I see an x. So I've got negative 2 squared plus 4 times negative 2 minus 5. So that's going to be positive 4 minus 8 minus 5. So let's see, negative 9. So my y coordinate is negative 9. So negative 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. I know it's going to go off the graph. We'll just estimate. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We'll say it's way down here. The y-intercept, remember that's the c number. So the y-intercept is negative 5. That means it's going to hit the y-axis at negative 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll say right here. And again, use that idea of symmetry. I know that there's going to be a point equidistance. If the distance from the axis of symmetry to the point is that much, that means I'm going to have the same distance on the other side. So over here, see how that's the same distance this direction? Means there's another point, just because that helps me draw my parabola. Okay, I'm sorry that that went off the graph, but looks something like that. Okay, in factored form, so this was a different section, and notice number 3 is already factored for you, okay, so you don't have to factor it. Remember, the value of factored form is that it tells you the zeros, right? The zeros are the solutions, and the solution to the first parenthesis would be x equals 4, and the solution to the second parenthesis would be x equals negative 6. That means those are the x-intercepts, those are the zeros. So this parabola hits the x-axis at positive 4 and negative 6. And then remember we said in order to find the axis of symmetry, it's going to be halfway between those. Well, so x equals, what would be halfway between negative 6 and 4? I mean, if you count the spaces, there's a total of 10 spaces between negative 6 and 4. So doesn't that mean the axis of symmetry is going to be 5 spaces from each side? So from this 4, I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So right in here is the middle at x equals -1. So here's my axis of symmetry down through -1. And then the vertex, remember you always use the axis of symmetry. And in order to find the y-coordinate, we're going to plug in x. In this case, I'm plugging in x right up here into the original, so I could plug it in there, and I would also plug it in there. So I've got y equals, you got a 1/5 out in front. If I plug a -1 into the first parenthesis, -1 minus 4 is -5. And if I plug a -1 into the second parenthesis, -1 plus 6 is +5. To me, this is going to be easy to simplify because you could say, hey, look, won't the 5 in the denominator cancel the 5 right there? And so really we're just going to end up with -5. Okay, if it's easier, you might say, oh, I have 1/5 times -25. If it's easier to cancel that way, 5 into 25 is -5. Whatever makes more sense to you. So the y-coordinate is -5. So the vertex is -1, -5 down here. And so I've got 3 points. This is going to be kind of a wide parabola. Something like that. Okay. So we've got one more in factored form. It's in factored form, so remember the zeros are the solutions or the x-intercepts. So I've got x equals -2, and from that one I've got x equals 6. So that means my parabola hits the x-axis at -2. Whoops, -6, right? Because it's the opposite, and -6. So right there. Remember we said the axis of symmetry is the middle of those. So the middle of -6 and -2 would be -4. So my axis of symmetry is along here, -4. And we said to find the vertex, you've got to plug that -4 in for x. So again, I'm plugging it in for x into my equation. So I've got y equals, if I put -4 into the first parenthesis, I'm going to have -2. And if I put -4 into the second parenthesis, I'm going to have +2. And when you multiply, that's going to come out to be -4. So my vertex is -4, -4 right here. And I've got the 3 points I need, and I could draw my parabola. Whoops, sorry. Something like that. Okay. Now, before I do this, the 5 through 8, here's kind of that extra little hint I was telling you about. I'm going to show you kind of a couple. So we've got some like what we just did on your quiz, but I've got some that look a little bit different, but they're asking the same question. So what if I give you something like this? Okay. And we'll use it on this graph over here. It says, actually, let's say, no, we don't know what the graph is. Sorry about that. This is all we're given. All we're given is this equation, and it says to find the zeros and the vertex. So you don't have to graph it. It just says find the zeros and the vertex. If it were me, anytime it says find the zeros, that's your hint that factored form is going to be the easiest, because that's the point of factored form. It finds the zeros. So since that tells me, hey, you should probably use factored form, I'm going to factor. And this one, notice it looks a little different. It's not one where we automatically set up 2 parentheses because it's not a trinomial. In fact, wouldn't this one be factored by just taking out a common factor of x? So you'd have x times x plus 10. Okay, and so my zeros are, well, the first solution would be x equals 0. And the second solution would be x equals -10. So there's my zeros. And then how do we find the vertex? Well, isn't the vertex always in the middle of those? Well, what would be the middle of 0 and -10? Hopefully you can tell the middle would be -5, right? So the x-coordinate comes from the middle of the zeros, but then how do I get my y-coordinate? Well, what did we do last time? Don't we plug -5 in? And you can either plug it into this form if you think that's easiest, or you can plug it into this form if you think that's easiest. I think it's easy to plug into factored form. Because if I plug in -5 for the first x, I just had -5. And then in my parenthesis, if I plug in -5 for that second x, -5 plus 10 is +5. So what does that equal? Doesn't that equal -25? And luckily we don't have to graph this because that would be, way off the graph. In this case, it just said find the zeros in the vertex. Okay, so that's one way that we can have questions looking on the quiz. Another way is what I have over here next to it. Suppose in this case, all I do is give you a graph. And so we can use this one up here as an example. Suppose all I do is give you a graph and I say, I want you to write the equation in vertex form and then in factored form. Okay, vertex form and factored form. Well, the clue here is if it's vertex form, then what you're looking at is the vertex. And on this parabola, this is the vertex. So what made this parabola move to that vertex? Well, you're going to have a parenthesis squared, right? And since it was moved 4 units to the right, it's going to be an x minus 4. Since that vertex is 2 units down, it's going to be a -2. And do you see, because they showed me the zeros right here, do you see that that would be an up 2 and over 1? So that means the number out in front is a 2. So that's a vertex form. That was actually on the first quiz, but it's going to be on this one also because I'm asking you to find both vertex form and factored form. Okay, for factored form, it's about the zeros, right? So for factored form, I would say y equals, and if it's factored form, that means you have your factors. Well, if my zeros are +3 and +5, doesn't that mean my factors are x minus 5? Sorry, I'll write it in the same order. X minus 3 and x minus 5, because remember the factors are the opposite, so 3 and 5. So this is my, whoops, let me get that. I know I erased the wording. There we go. So for my factored form, it's x minus 5 and x minus 3. It doesn't matter what order you write them in. So there's my factored form and there's my vertex form. So I just wanted to show you that there are some problems on the quiz, yes, that are just like these up here, but then there's some that are worded a little differently. They look like this. Okay, so let's go back to this number 5 through 8. Okay, it says, remember standard form looks like this. So there might be a number in front of the x squared, might be a number in front of the b, might be a number over there at the end. And then the vertex form looks something like this, where you have a number out in front. You might have x minus some number. That h just represents some number. And then you might have a number added or subtracted over at the end. Okay? So number 5. Is the k number, so we're talking about this one from the vertex form, is the k number positive or negative? Well, doesn't that k number at the end tell you if the parabola's been moved up or down? And since this parabola was moved down, doesn't that mean that the k number must have been negative, right? It must have been a minus k. So is k greater than 0? No, k is less than 0, right? Because k is negative. We're going to say here k is less than 0. And parentheses will say that means it was negative. So that's a false. Okay, is the c number less than 0? Remember, the c number is from the standard form, and what does c represent? It represents the y-intercept. And you might be looking at this and saying, well, there is no y-intercept. Well, you just don't see it, because isn't this parabola going to continue up this direction? And as it keeps going, eventually it's going to cross this y-axis, right? And when it crosses, it's going to be way up high. So isn't the y-intercept going to be a really high number, very positive? So that means that if it says c is less than 0, that's saying c is negative. No, it's not negative. The y-intercept is positive, right? So this is false. And then number 7, is the a number positive? Well, remember, a is from standard form, it's the number out in front. Well, or you could say it's the number out in front of vertex form, but basically the a is the number out in front. Well, doesn't that a tell you if your parabola opens up or down? And if A is positive, doesn't that mean the parabola opens up? Well, this parabola opens up, so we think A should be positive. Isn't that what this says? A is greater than 0, positive, so that's true. And this H one, you won't have to do that one on your quiz. Okay? I know there's going to be some questions. Hey, are we going to have problems like 5, 6, and 7 on our quiz? And the answer is yes. So make sure you practice. Also, don't forget that there's a practice quiz on Canvas with the answers that shows all of these types of problems. I would strongly encourage you to do that. All right, there you go. Let's see. You know, I'll be in class on Wednesday if you want to come in during activity period to get some help. But then your quiz is on Thursday, and even though we don't have activity period in the morning, I'll be here before school in case you want to come and ask some questions. All right, there you go. Hope that helps.